Hello, everybody. Welcome to this keynote conversation for our 6th annual Digital Knowledge Sharing Workshop here at the Library and Museum of the American Philosophical Society. I'm very glad that all of you have been able to join us today, and we're looking forward to this conversation. This program is an activity of the Society's Center for Native American and Indigenous Research and its Native American Scholars Initiative. My colleagues will paste in some links for more about these programs. To begin this program, we'd like to acknowledge and bring forward that the American Philosophical Society resides in Lenapehoking, the past, present, and ongoing homeland of the Lenape people. We wish to acknowledge their continued presence and perseverance, despite centuries of land theft, removal, and genocidal policies that have affected their language and cultural traditions. The Society also acknowledges that it has benefited from being an occupant of this part of Lenape land now called Philadelphia. Because of this, through its Center for Native American and Indigenous Research, the Society seeks to promote research that honors Indigenous knowledge, cultivates scholarship, and strengthens languages and cultural traditions. And we want to express our sincere thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of numerous Indigenous communities and individuals who have offered guidance, expertise, and opportunities for collaborations that have made this work possible and continue to do so. For those joining us for the first time, the American Philosophical Society was founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1743. The Society is a catalyst for the discovery of new knowledge. Election to membership to the Society honors those who have made exceptionally significant contributions to science, the arts and humanities, and public life. The Society promotes research by providing over $1.5 million annually in research grants, especially to younger scholars and most in need of such support. Our library and museum collections and research centers serve scholars and visitors from across the globe. So please check out the website, amphilsoc.org, to learn more about what we do and for news of upcoming events. And our Center for Native American Indigenous Research is the primary contact point for people wishing to work with our Indigenous collections here at the Library and Museum. We offer digitization for free to community-based Indigenous researchers, requesters, and community entities. And we are glad to be in touch and share more information with anyone interested on those collections and our programs. We're using the Zoom webinar today for today's discussion, so don't worry, you're muted. So if you have a question at any point during our conversation today, just please use the Q&A button which is at the bottom center of your navigation bar. You can type your question in there at any time, and after Alan's presentation, there will be time at the end for questions and in conversation. We're excited to offer, I think we're offering closed captioning, I forget. Anyway, if so, we have, you can click on the CC box on the bottom navigation bar of Zoom next to the Q&A button. With this, at long last, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Alan Corbiere. Dr. Alan Ojig Corbiere is an Anishinaabe from Chiging First Nation on Manitoulin Island. He was educated on the reserve and then attended the University of Toronto for a Bachelor of Science, and then entered York University and earned his Master's of Environmental Studies. During his master's studies, he focused on Anishinaabe narrative and Anishinaabe language revitalization. For 5 years, he served as the executive director of the Ojibwe Cultural Foundation in Chiging, a position which also encompassed the roles of curator and historian. He has also served as the Anishinaabemowin revitalization program coordinator at Lakeview School, also in Chiging First Nation, where he and his co-workers developed a culturally based second language program that focused on using Anishinaabe stories to teach language. He defended his PhD thesis in 2020 and is now an assistant professor in the history department at York University. He currently holds a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Indigenous History of North America. And today he'll be speaking on the topic of Weweni Zgaknigedaa, let's properly store things. And with that, I will hand it off to Alan. Alan, the Zoom floor is yours.
Okay, nanabojo, ninso jik benen dodem mampim chiging donjaba, chiging jinkade manda shkonaganing enjabaya, minwa dash gyabe ndida mampi Anishinaabemowin king. My name is Ojik, that means the fisher, and that's a member of the weasel family. He's a little animal, but he's fierce. He's a four-legged, and he's able to kill porcupines, but as well, I've heard stories where he actually will not back down from taking on a bigger animal. In contrast, my dodem, my clan, is a bine, and that's what people commonly call a partridge, but it's properly the ruffed grouse. And these ones are actually pretty tame and docile in contrast to the fisher. So people will have noted to me how easy it is to kill a partridge, my dodem, that they'll freeze and they'll try and hide by camouflage, but people end up being able to kill them. I want to thank the CNAIR, the American Philosophical Society, for inviting me to do this talk today. And I listened to the presentations this afternoon, and as I suspected, many of us are in the same situations, but different locales. And we are experiencing the same type of challenges, but we're also looking at actually innovative ways to overcome and surmount those challenges. So we have a good group of people actually situated physically at the American Philosophical Society. Unfortunately, my flight got canceled on me like a couple of hours before I was leaving, and I can't be there with you all. I wanted to talk about, I was asked to talk about what I've been doing for, I guess, for the last 30 years. And Brian, you did a really good job of announcing my name and my location, and you hit the first word pretty good with Weweni. That means properly or carefully. And Zgaknigedaa, that means let's either put things away or store them. So the funny thing about this is this presentation will be, actually, I wanted to be, of course, positive, but I wanted to also say this is actually what not to do. Part of the story is how I learned what I've learned, and also trial and error, and of course things that didn't really work out too well, and then how things, particularly, and this was emphasized by a number of the speakers today, how funding and inadequate funding and sporadic funding actually impacts our overall goals. So anyway, of course, I have to thank the Canada Research Chair Program that funds my research at York University, as well as the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council that funds that as well. Also, I wanted to thank Chiging First Nation for a number of years, and the Ojibwe Culture Foundation for actually hiring me and placing their trust in me, a number of the elders. This I just added this in because earlier we were talking, and one of the speakers had mentioned that some of the formulaic language that they were encountering in the Cherokee written materials was too complex for their teachers, so they don't bother using it. And my friends and I, what I would say right now is myself, I don't speak very good Anishinaabe. I know a lot of it, I can say a lot of it, and I can understand quite a bit, and I transcribe elders. I've been recording elders for over 20 years, and I've been transcribing what they say, and I'll show some of the samples of my work. But I just found this funny. A friend of mine sent this to me this morning, and we're looking at motivations as well as the reason why you learn the language. And a lot of times we're told to learn our language so that we can communicate with our ancestors. Anyway, this person, I don't know this person, Migeze Pensano. My friend sent this to me and says, I speak my traditional language so my ancestors can understand me. I hear them answer me on the wind. We get it, you can count. Maybe learn more than numbers and animals and bad words. So I just found that funny. But because the thing is, I find and I think we're stuck at perpetual beginner Ojibwe, beginner Anishinaabemowin. In a lot of our programs, especially our formalized institutional responses in a number of schools on reserves and off reserves, that we feel like we're doing something, and we are doing something, but in the long run, if we're looking at it really critically, it's not enough. But there are programs that have started, and there are younger people than myself that have actually, just last Friday, there was a group of, they're called Anishinaabemowin, and they did a 2-week intensive immersion program for adults. And there's supposed to be no Ojibwe, English spoken during that time, and they get elders to come in, first language speakers to come in and talk with them. Where I worked before was a place called the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, and in Canada, this is called the First Nations Cultural Education Center, and it was founded in 1974. And they at that time they started noticing that the language, that younger people weren't picking up the language, so they would have these elder gatherings, and they also know that language is intimately and inextricably cultural knowledge, and sometimes even history and geography. So there are all that language carries so much, but people we're not really prepared yet to actually delve into those deeper meanings. I should say learners aren't. Of course, we still have people that speak, but in the last 30 years that I've been endeavoring to learn to speak Ojibwe and document Ojibwe and teach Ojibwe in my own community now, we've had a really startling loss of speakers. And it wasn't really necessarily COVID, it's actually just a generational thing. The generation that spoke Ojibwe as a first language, they're getting older and older, and they're passing away, and nobody is replacing them. So this is William Trudeau, and he was from Manitoulin Island, but from a reserve on the east end of Manitoulin called Weweni. And he was quite active with the Ojibwe Culture Foundation in these elder gatherings, these youth gatherings, and in different initiatives. But he was a very eloquent speaker of Anishinaabemowin. And one of the things we did while I was at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation was we made a book of some of his recordings. So he allowed himself to be recorded a number of times speaking in Ojibwe. And here he is addressing a crowd at a Birch Island, which is a neighboring reserve here. And he's addressing the crowd there and telling a story. But that gets a Pizzajik the Bajmowak. That means our elders are telling stories. And that's the name of the book that we produced at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. And we took the elder stories that they told in Ojibwe first. But I always turn to this quote of his that's in one of those stories. He finished telling this epic story about the first two people, the spirit beings that we call Paisak. And these Paisak are little people. There are different classes of little people, but in English, everyone just says little people, but they're small people called Boguje Anishinaabe Sak, Boguje Nini Sak, and Paisak, and Memegwesewak. Those are all different kinds of small people, little people. But now in English, we lump them into one category, little people. but there are actually 4 different types. Anyway, he says, there's a lot in that story for one to think about. And he just finished telling this long story, an hour-long story. And he wanted people to think about not just what happened, but the words that are used in it. It used to be, I shouldn't say, I was a Shkabewis, and in Ojibwe, a Shkabewis colloquially is translated as a helper, but I like the more formal definition of ceremonial attendant. And the reason I like the ceremonial attendant is because all those people that are serving as a Shkabewis are really in training to eventually take over that ceremony. Anyway, I used to be in the ceremony maker that I was serving as a Shkabewis up to. His name was Gijikagabo Ba. Anyway, my uncle had come to one of these ceremonies, and we were there. All of us Shkabewis are running around helping, but my uncle just went to participate and to listen. Anyway, he didn't come back, and I said, "How come he didn't come back?" And he goes, "Where are the teachings there? I didn't hear any of the teachings. These guys are just running around, and I didn't hear any of the teachings." So my uncle expected something more didactic and more, this is what the teaching is. And it was more, you got to be involved to get the teachings. So there was a shift there. Anyway, I asked Gijikagabo about that. And then he says, Kenjigewin Mishkikiwan. It's the knowledge and knowing that is the medicine. So my uncle was expecting to hear recipes of medicines and to hear about how the curative properties of different medicines, and then to hear different stories about what these are, how these are enacted, and how they can cure and help people. And I was, to a certain extent, I was also had that same understanding or expectation. Then when he said that, knowledge is medicine, and that really clicked in my mind. Of course, there was also, in the late 80s, there was a book released by the late spiritual leader, Ojibwe spiritual leader, Eddie Benton Bene, that when he wrote this book, and it's had a profound effect in the Anishinaabe king in Ojibwe country, Anishinaabe country. And he said that there's this is about prophecies. He said that there was a 7th prophet showed up, and he says, in the time of the 7th fire, will emerge. They will retrace their steps to find what was left by the trail. And I've always, I came to know these things after these quotes afterward, but I didn't realize that these were actually inherent in my practice in what I was actually doing. So like I mentioned, I moved back to the reserve, and after I did my master's degree at York University, and I focused on Anishinaabe narrative. I wanted to make my studies merge my goal of becoming fluent in Ojibwe. And of course, at 30 years, 25 years later, I'm still not, I don't consider myself anywhere near fluent. I know a lot, but anyway, I recorded these elders, and I made newsletters because I wanted these newsletters to reach my fellow Anishinaabe, especially my fellow community members, to see and gain an appreciation of the Anishinaabemowin, our language, as well as our history, and that the knowledge that we actually have in our community. So I had recorded my late buddy, as my wife called him, my old man friend. His name was Louis Debosque, but in his Anishinaabe name was Zenba Namit, dancing ribbon. Anyway, he told this phenomenal story about his ancestor named Nibakum. And then what I found in the archives was that Nibakum, I found archival references to him, and I did archival research, and that story that Lewis had told me, actually there was archival information that I complemented his story with. He was really happy with that, because he just thought, I just thought this was a family story, he said. Anyway, we were surprised to bring these two documentation together. And then after this was called Kinamarok, and this program we ran from like 2002 to 2005 on the reserve here. And Kinamadok means they are teaching each other. And we started this because a number of us had finished school, but we didn't know what each other had done in school. Some of us had our master's degrees, some of us had a Bachelor of Arts and honors. And we just said, well, let's just get together and share what we studied about our community. And when we get together, let's talk to each other about what we learned. And we'll share it with the community. Otherwise, what happens is people get their degrees and they've done their research and then they don't share it. Not by being stingy or anything, there's just really no form. So that's what we decided to do. So that's how that program started. We started teaching each other. And at that time, we had in the community a TV channel for our community, and it was called TV 22. And one of the members of this Kinamadok group was actually the one who was the videographer and the worker at the TV 22. So he recorded a lot of elders for our community as well. That became a corpus of material that we wanted to access as well. Of course, that was one of my jobs. And then the funding ran out. So after the funding ran out, then I ended up getting hired at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, which is actually down the road from where I worked. But the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, like I mentioned, had a longer history and more stable funding, but it was still inadequate funding. That I was I worked there. Anyway, they had recorded elders for a number of years, and they had way more recordings, and not just confined to the community of Chiging. They recorded elders in 17 First Nation communities on the North Shore of Lake Huron and on the island of Manitoulin. These are two, pictured here are two late elders, the late Archie and Violet McGregor, and they were instrumental and very active in the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. And actually, Archie wrote a book after. He made a book of his stories, and his sister-in-law, Mary Wamigwas, wrote them all out, and they published that book. And he was very proud of that book. It's a really good book. Little book, and it's written in Ojibwe and in English. So one of the things, while I started doing this archival research, I ended up working, and I would do these presentations at Anishinaabemowin, which is our annual language conference. And I met a friend of mine now. She wasn't at the time, of course, but I consider her my mentor in archival research. She told me a story, and this is kind of what guided my research afterwards. She said that at the time she was the land claim research coordinator for her community, Anishinaabemowin, which is called Cape Croker in English. My friend Darlene Johnson is a trained lawyer, but she's also a historian and archivist, archival. Anyway, she said one day she was out in the community, and this was before cell phones were such a big thing. And maybe she had a cell phone, but I think she actually took this call on a landline. She got a message to call the office. She was away. And it was the lawyer for their court case. And the lawyer said to her, "Oh, Darlene, where's this document? It's in your report. You say it's here, but we need to look at the full document," because they had just used an excerpt in the land claim report. So she says, "Oh, tell my student there that it's in the second cabinet by the doorway, 2 drawers down, in the file named whatever the file was named." And he says, "What?" She goes, "It's on the second drawer, second filing cabinet, second drawer down." No, I heard you. He says, "Are you the only one that knows your filing system? What if somebody hit you what if you got hit by a bus?" He says, "What would happen? Nobody would know where to find anything. You need to make a filing system." So that's what ended up, because I was doing all these, and I still do these transcriptions and stuff. Then I was like, nobody's going to know what I've done, where to find stuff. So she said, you gotta make a filing list, a list of where your files are. So finally, I was able to hire an assistant, Lenore Harvey here in Chiging, and we went back and forth. And I forget who it was today. Maybe it was Laura Span, or maybe it was Alex, but it might have been also No, I don't think it was. Maybe it was Sarah. Anyway, they had said they had used this obsolete software at the time to make a database, and I think it was it was Alex, because he said it was Toolbox, but I think back then the linguists called that Shoebox. Anyway, it's obsolete and they couldn't get into it. So the same thing happened with us here at the tribal council. They had invested in a thing called InMagic, a database management software that was called InMagic, and nobody could get into it anymore. And the company went bankrupt and went under, and everyone had these CD-ROMs of this stuff, but nobody could actually get into it anymore. So Darlene told me one of the things you have to decide is if you want this accessible for everyone, and something that's durable and that's going to last. So we decided to get her, Lenore, my research assistant, training in Microsoft Access, just because we thought Microsoft is likely going to stick around for a while. So that's what we did. So my overall goal isn't a land claim, although my information that I've compiled has been used in different land claims. But my goal, I see myself like how Alex had described himself, as a language learner and a cultural learner and a historian, learning all this to try and then, and I kind of fell into the role of teacher. I never thought of myself as a teacher. I just wanted to compile. I just started being curious about this, and I thought that I would end up looking at this stuff and presenting it back. I always wanted to present it back. I wanted more people to know, because I often thought this is so interesting. Everyone else should know this, and that's what my reasoning was. Anyway, I'm dating myself here, but what I was really influenced by was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People in the 90s, and this was a report here. This diagram that I found very like a simplistic. Its simplicity is able to convey how we would organize our curriculum. Because right now, you see that the low end were native languages incorporated. When I was a kid, we had schooling here on the reserve, and we had taught Ojibwe once or twice a week, and that was limited cultural inclusion, and we had limited native language. Now, I think we're still stuck at cultural inclusion, where we have native language and some content material. But we were trying to go further up the scale and to develop an immersion program so that we could get from A to B. And this again goes back to that sentiment where, you know, a lot of people come out of our schools, they're able to count, they know the numbers, they know the colors, they know some animals, but they can't really put all that together. And that's when we say, like I was saying, some say that some of this stuff is what I've done is too complex. And actually, when I was teaching adults before, and we were doing these, one of the assignments was we had a video, and I says, okay, you guys, I think, are far enough along that, and if you aren't, but this is just going to make good practice, is that I had 10 students, and we had a 20-minute video, and I said, you, student A, are going to do transcribe from 1 minute to 2 minutes. You, student B, are going to do 2 minutes to 4, and then C, 4 to 6, etc., all the way up to 20 minutes. So we put that all together, and we transcribed a whole thing. And they said that video is too long, so they wanted it to be shortened. He said, we just want short videos. So I got these. I'll show you later some of these videos that we made. But the idea is to actually try and get our students to appreciate, without getting overwhelmed, to slowly develop an appreciation of the complexity of our language, but also the beauty of our language, as well as how much that actually holds. So when we were developing this program, the Anishinaabemowin Revival Program, now I should back up just a bit to say that my job at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation had ceased, and that was 2011. And then I went into Anishinaabemowin Revival Program at the Chagin First Nation here, and we were to develop an enhanced language program. And that's where I was like, okay, we want the students to understand these stories, and I had recorded elders. These are the formulative stories that our students should understand in Ojibwe. But how do we get them from here to here? And so I started documenting, we started transcribing, we started doing all these other activities. And some of the stories that some of the elders didn't have the stories anymore about our culture here, Nanabojo. So I had to look at other places for that. And one of these actual other places was the American Philosophical Society, the Edwegijik collection and recordings. And at that time, I fell upon a book edited by Michael McNally called The Art of Tradition. And in there, he elected to use and publish the materials in the idiosyncratic and obsolete orthography that Gertrude Karath and Jane and Frank Edward-Kijik used at that time. So one of the things I did with the elders that I work with here is I transliterated that into the double vowel orthography now. And then they verified those words that were, I wasn't sure what some of the words were. So we made a corpus of material that we could use from that book, and we were going to put it into this curriculum. Similarly, Howard Webb Komagut has published a valuable book called Odawa Stories from the Springs, and those use that collection as well. And he was using that to teach at Ogoma University. The other thing we did was anthropologists as well as geological surveyors came through our community, and they recorded stories in English, and they also asked people from the community and from the surrounding communities to write in English the stories of their people. And this was in the 1890s and early 1910s. And so we said, well, this is our idea. We're going to put all this into a funnel. And that why I use the funnel is to show there's so much material, but the process that actually you have a big bottleneck to create these local resources, cultural resources that are in your language, in your dialect, and from your community. Anyway, I called it the well. And then one of the things that that really struck me back in the early 90s, I met a woman there at the University of Toronto, and her husband actually was the lawyer for our land claim. And he says, have you ever read Alvin Toffler? He asked me, and I said, no, I've never read it. He says, one day, he says, Toffler says he has a concept called the electronic cabin. And he says people are going to be working from their homes, and that the office is no longer going to be a place where people will go to work. And that book was written in the 80s, I believe. Anyway, he told me that in the 90s. And then, of course, when the pandemic hit, and of course, I'm now presenting to you from my den at home. This actually came to pass. But the other thing that he had said in that book was that as a society, we've been concerned or preoccupied with storing information. But in the future, the shift will be to finding information. That's a paraphrase. I couldn't find the exact thing he said. But that's just how I've often thought of that and of course, this is the American Philosophical Society. This is a repository where we're storing information. But now we're shifting now, especially Indigenous people, and especially people hooked up to the internet. People are looking for information all over, and they actually are finding it online. And sometimes it's Facebook, but hopefully it's repositories like museums and archives and other societies, universities. So one of the things that I had wanted to do was, like I said, we have these repositories, museums, and archives have finding aids. And if you go to an archive and you want to look up something, you go to the finding aid first, and then you start to go through and you say, okay, that's this collection, this fonds, or this folio, and you can look stuff up. And then at a museum, same thing. You can look up on the database or the catalog, and you can do, okay, what materials were collected from our area, or what materials are used in construction of this or that. So you can do collections research in museums, and you can do research at archives with finding aids. But in the communities, we have a number of different communities have significant videotape collections, but there are no finding aids for those. And oftentimes, like I said, when I worked at Chiging, we had TV22, and all I would say on the spine of the VHS or the super VHS, I guess, because they were using the tapes that were more higher quality, and it said on there, it would just say, for example, Ted Corbiere, or it would say Veronica Corbiere. That's Ted Corbiere is my dad's name. Veronica Corbiere is my aunt, and that's all it would say. And then sometimes it would say picking sweetgrass or other things. So you really had to know, like, okay, what am I looking for? What did they say here? So there is no finding aid for this yet. And the TV22, that's a mixed collection of English, where the elders and community members are talking English or doing presentations in English, or it's just everyday chief and council I should say, the monthly chief and council meetings, or it's different issues that were confronting chief and council, and they did a presentation to the community. And like I mentioned, the Ojibwe Culture Foundation actually has over 3,000 tapes, and 2,000 have been digitized since 2017. And this is the work of my colleague, Anna St. Ange, who works at the York University. As well, the other one that I should mention at this point was Anung Beam, who actually was able to secure a grant to get a lot of this material digitized. But like it says here, they're in a variety of formats, and like your communities, while I was listening to Alex, he was talking about Seneca materials. That's the same thing here. So, and then more recently, we've had a project here called the Kendaswin Summit Series. And a colleague of mine, Deb McGregor, had organized this, as well as with her colleague, Sue Chiblo. And they recorded elders. They had these sessions on the North Shore of Lake Huron. And on the North Shore of Lake Huron, you still have a number of elders that speak Ojibwe. So they had this session on environment and traditional ecological knowledge, and that's what this was. But they posted it up on YouTube, and so it just said Ken Doswin, and people go to YouTube and they see that, but they don't really know what they're watching, and there's no finding aid as well. I'm part of this project on Black Creek Pioneer Village down in Toronto, which is close to York University. But we were doing this research, and we thought, well, we could look at what the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, because they're the treaty signers for that area, and they the stewards of that area as well. Anyway, for the last 10 years, the Mississaugas of the Credit have had a historical gathering, and they've invited different speakers to come in. Anyway, what this was is a repository of 10 years of presentations. The easy thing about this to work with is that each of these Mississaugas gathering had an agenda, and it listed who the speaker was and what the topic was. So we had a summer student, I shouldn't say summer student, we had a student at university, Guillaume Jean, and he actually went through and listened to 4 years of these tapes, and he developed a finding aid. And that was what we hired him to do, was to do this. And actually, he wasn't hired, sorry, he was doing this as a placement, and he got credit for it, the university credit for it. Anyway, he did an excellent job, but there was minimal Ojibwe spoken in this particular collection of tapes, the Mississauga. The next one, the Kendaswin Summit Series, it has some Ojibwe in there, some speakers of Ojibwe. But then you get to the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, there is more Ojibwe spoken and monolingual recordings in there. So what I wanted to do was to actually get to the monolingual Ojibwe stuff. I thought to myself, anybody, I shouldn't say anybody, but many people can already work with the English material. And in fact, software is actually progressing so fast that they're going to be able to they can, like Zoom right now, if you hit I forget what the setting is, it can actually come up with a transcript of what I'm saying right now and send this out. So the technology is actually already there. So this is what Guillaume Jean had devised based on my guidance and saying, look out for these categories. And so he went through this Mississaugas of the Credit recording the 4 years that he had, and he came up with place names, indigenous language. Whenever a speaker mentioned any of these, then he had a code. So the next thing he did was he made a spreadsheet. This is actually an Excel spreadsheet. And we used this just because we thought that would be more applicable or accessible to different groups. And you see here on the side, we then used his template and we applied it to the Weweni North Shore Tribal Council Kendaswan series that I talked about. So we used that same template that Guillaume Jean had used, and I told him to make sure he timestamps all of this. So on your left column, you see all the times, and then here the presentation name, and then the presenter's name, and then the time start and the time in the actual recording. And then here's the topics, and then here are the categories that they did. So the interesting thing, I just found this out at 5 o'clock today. I'm recycling this because we used this Anna St. Ange, Guillaume Jean, and Kelly McCloy, 2 students, and my colleague Anna St. Ange. We did this presentation a couple of times. So I'm reusing this, but this shows the precariousness of our endeavors. So I thought, okay, I'll be able to show you that I can click at 6 minutes and 57 seconds on this, and it'll take me to the site. And 2 months ago, this actually worked. It would take me to the YouTube site. Now you see that it doesn't. I don't know if it. Sometimes when you do these share screen stuff, it doesn't jump to that. But I hope that what you are seeing is what I'm seeing. It says, sorry, the file that you've requested has been deleted, and that's beyond my control. Somebody else controls that data, and we did all that work, and now I don't know where the links go to the YouTube videos. And I looked on YouTube before this presentation to try and find those videos. I don't know if they've been taken down. Anyway, I'll share screen again and go back to, so I hope you saw that link is dead, basically. So all of our efforts were to do that. And one of the things that I wanted to mention here is that we wanted to, on the one hand, on the left column there, this was our philosophy for Anishinaabemowin revitalization program, that you preserve our three braids or 3 strands of a braid were preservation, maintenance, and revitalization. So I see that you preserve, and this is where some would argue this is the easier part: preserve, making preservation, creating records. And then the next harder part is to maintain the language existing language rate that you have in your community, speaking your language, writing your language, using it every day. And then the hardest part is revitalizing it, creating new words, creating new spaces, new places to use it, and then composing new stories, and then also creating new speakers and developing new speakers. And then, so to me, that's the degree of difficulty. But what these repositories, the analogy as well is, the immediate goal of these projects is to make digital recordings of Indigenous knowledge and make them more accessible to their respective community and interested researchers. The long-term goal is to interconnect these separate digital repositories so that community members and researchers can conduct research across all participating repositories. So this, of course, the fancy word for this is that if you have these digital repositories they're interoperable. So the idea is that I would be able, as a researcher, if we had this, I would be able to enter a keyword search, and it would actually check sources of credit, it would check the Kendaswan, it would check OCF, and it would check the Chaging video repositories for this keyword search. Let's say I'm doing a report, I'm researching a particular medicine, that's called pennyroyal, just for an example. And I'd see if any of these digital repositories have that, and it would search all these. Is the long-term goal. We're nowhere near this yet. I'm just saying that's the long-term goal, to develop enough of this so that all these repositories can talk to each other and do that. Anyway, there's a number of different issues with that. One is that the archival recordings, we have to use, some of them don't have, quote unquote, the permissions weren't used that way, the way we do permissions now. And then we also sometimes miss out on the who says what, when, and how that matters. Identifying participants will assist in the rights of clearance. So sometimes we don't, like for instance, when I had those students working on these recordings, they didn't know who those people were. That they said, "Can you identify this person?" And we sent out an email blast to different people, and then they were able to identify people. But what some of these older recordings, and Maureen Matthews talked about this, and Carol Bolio talked about earlier today, in identifying people in photographs for the Hollowell collection at the American Philosophical Society. But what we are doing is the same thing, is that in these video recordings, we got to identify people, because sometimes the information isn't there. And so the metadata is also presents different challenges. What are most helpful, useful data points to capture? What topics are relevant to users and participants? And then access and provenance. We want to talk about a bit about OCAP, and this is a concept. I don't know if this is a concept in the States, but in Canada, this is a concept: ownership, control, access, and possession of the data and of the actual materials. So of course, we're doing this talk from the American Philosophical Society that holds this material. So we actually don't possess it there. So where will these files be preserved, and how will access be provided after the project ends? These are questions that are being worked on as well. So here, one of the things is that this was what Anna St. Ange pulled together for us. Responsible sharing. What are the responsibilities of record holders and creators? Rights, copyright and citation, sustainability, authenticity. So if you recall from the opening slide that I had, where I talked about those elders, and how William Trudeau had said there's a lot to contemplate in that story. And then I mentioned Gijika Gabo had said that the knowledge is the medicine. And then the last quote I had said is that about the seventh fire prophecy that Bad Weweni had written about in the Mishomas book. But the only one that I was really able to provide a full citation to is Eddie Benton Benet's book. So we don't have this this way of actually creating a citation format yet for these. And then I forget who it was Laura today talked about having all of these derivative copies, and that's what happened at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. They made different materials, they used the different recordings for different things, and they ended up finding making new materials. And so then they got a recording of a recording, or they got a copy of a copy, and so this ends up populating, and that was what was physically occupying space on the cupboard, the shelf. But now this actually is happening on computers and external hard drives and in the cloud, where you got the main master copy. Maybe it was on an SD card, or maybe mini DVC or a CD-ROM, but now it's digitized, and it's a file on your computer. But then you go and make an iMovie thing, and then you save that. And now it's populating space on your hard drive or your computer, or up in the cloud. So who should have access? This is and then Sarah Snyder talked about this as well, and that what they're going through with those documents that are written. But balancing the desire to share with the need for integrity and authenticity. Have we considered the original context of the recordings? Do you have the capacity to vet requests and provide timely access? So when we published that book that I mentioned with William Trudeau's story in there, it was also a number of other elder stories in there. And we at the Ojibwe Culture Foundation, we published it because we are the owners, they are the owners of those videotapes. So that was my timer. This is the Chiging video. And this is our website. And I think I'll be able to get us there. So this is our website. I hope this is transferring. Okay, so you can come here and then you go down to community, you go to Anishinaabemowin, and then go to videos. And here, what had happened, this is again, one of the perils of startup projects that end, that are project-based. You end up getting funding for a little while, then project stops, and then you get funding again. So there's no actual consistent sustainable funding for this. Anyway, I want to just show you one video. These are all videos, and here, this is I'm just going to see if Brian says you lost the YouTube videos, maybe accessible. Oh, okay. Adriana, can you just give me a thumbs up if you see that, or Brian, that you can actually see this video? I can't tell if you are seeing what I'm seeing. Can't see it. Okay. Okay, what I'll do is I'll stop shared and I'll start share again. That's probably what's going to have to happen here. So did that work? Okay, good, great. So this is my uncle's video. He wanted to do this because he's setting a net under the ice. And I'm not going to play the whole video. I just want to use this to show you the kind of stuff we did. And
Ishinge gungwid up namong skik makwe. Ya, kage gug de benzina, ma peking. Kinege gug de dange na. Mit de shabdek sema we saying, we ishmonaing, ma wid up nine, we the kita.
So he is speaking Ojibwe there. And one of the things that I wanted to tell you is because I don't know if I'll back up a bit. When I left Chiging, all these videos that we had done in 2002 and posted in 2005, the server, they switched the band, chief and council, the administration switched servers, service providers. And then all those videos that we had put up, they got taken down and they didn't get put back up. So then we had to go and tell the chief and council again and the administration, put those back up. And that happened around 2011. And then again, it happened again when I left. We were posting these up, and I had an excellent coworker, Clarice Pongosh, who was actually the web mistress, and she was able to put up all these videos and keep care of our site and put up these transcripts and that. Anyway, just this, they switched servers again, then they made a new, and we said, where's all that material? Because the elders are talking in Ojibwe. This should be up on our website, and every community member should have access to this. Anyway, I was the one who put these subtitles on the videos, and then we made transcripts, and then in other cases we made glossaries. But here, what you see here is my uncle's video, and he's talking. But here, this is supposed to be the transcript. So when they put it back up, this happened in 2020, that the site got changed, or 2021, and then they finally put this all back up in late 2022, early 2023. Whoever did it doesn't speak Ojibwe, and whoever did it didn't follow or didn't just use the Wayback Machine and put everything back up. They decided to do it the way they thought it should be. So this transcript here on your left column there, that's all written in Ojibwe, and that's all in English here. That's the wrong story. It doesn't match my uncle's story. So that's what happens when you switch service providers, and then you don't have continuity in your community. You end up getting some of these things you end up getting things mixed up, and they don't get put back up properly. So you need somebody in there who will actually keep things, be an overseer. And this is again is a funding issue, not necessarily people deliberately doing this or that. Anyway, this is just the nature. Here's how on your left, here's how Clarice had organized it on your left, and then here's how it's organized today. So they put this back up on June 2023. But you see, we categorize the videos, medicines and plants used, and then historical, and then customs and practices, and encounters with the spirit. But still, what I noticed, I noticed this afterward, is that I was talking to the choir, basically, and I didn't really fully list, this is what this video is about. So, for example, when we say The Apprentice historical, somebody wouldn't know what that means. They would say, okay, The Apprentice, maybe this is the show with former President Trump or whatever. But actually, it's a story about a medicine man and his apprentice. And so I need to put in a précis there as well. And to fully try and get this bit more fully going. Anyway, what we had another project, and we were collaborating with a linguist named Dustin Bowers, as well as Auntie Arp, who at that time, Auntie Arp is a linguist at the University of Alberta, and his student was Dustin Bowers. Dustin is now a graduate, but they were putting together this. They want to use this corpus of materials that we had. And these are the transcripts. And actually what they were developing, you see how you would be able, this was going to be an Ojibwe spell check. And actually the other thing that this was, is you scrolled over each of these words, and then see here, it says Chizibe. This would pop up Chizibe, and it would say noun, inanimate. And it would have all this information for each word that was on here. But now this was before this Anishinaabemowin online dictionary here that you see. And you see here that it says Da'agamishka with Nabish, sorry. The water that swirls. So I did all this before the Anishinaabemowin online dictionary occurred. And what we wanted to do now, this is a proposal that's in being considered, is to actually take these stories and then to match them so that every word in the transcripts is matched to the online dictionary. We're not there yet, but that's our project. And here, the other thing that, and again, remember, this is what I was saying, how do we get from point A to point B? And I didn't know that I was doing this, but the principal who hired me, I told him this, I'm gonna take all these stories I said, and then I'm going to take all the words apart, and then I'm going to make the curriculum so that the students actually learn about the words. But we're also going to learn about the most commonly used words in those stories, and we're going to teach them. And then we're also going to use the most commonly used grammatical forms. And we're going to deliberately teach them through from grade 1 all the way up to grade 8, so that by the time they get to grade 8, the students will be able to handle those videos. That was what I was thinking. So these linguists, they were able to take my transcripts, bust them up, and count the computer would detect what were the most frequently occurring words. And this shows here, these columns show how many times these words follow in the story of Debaske, K'Oga, Gibmejibabto. So each column represents a different story in there. And in here, these are the words that they analyzed and how many times they occurred. This was just a mock-up of what we were doing, what we're trying to do. So these are the last few slides, promise. Sorry, thank you for your patience. But here, this is, of course, these maps are always something of a challenge, but I like this map. And it was made by a fellow named Victor Temprano. And I pulled it off the internet. Anishinaabe, a king, and Carol Bolio, and then would say Anishinaabe, wa king. Anyway, all the way out from Montreal, all the way out, and some would actually argue that would go further west. But what I'm thinking of with these digital repositories is that I'm imagining I'm from this on Lake Huron here in this island. That's where I'm from. That I've used William Jones, who was a student of Franz Boas. William Jones was a Fox linguist who trained under Franz Boas, and he did an amazing collection it was published in 1917, but he was collecting these stories in 1910, 1911. And he wrote, it's an obsolete orthography, but we've been able to transliterate them into double vowel orthography. And that was also a source of stories we were using. And this is Waganagazing, La Arbor Croche. But imagine if all these different digital repositories had an interoperable function that you could actually then search for words. And then also we would then hook up to different dialects in Minnesota, as well as up by Pangasi and further west into the Soto people, but also the Algonquin people in Quebec. That is my dream. So one of the things is when I mentioned before that I had gone down to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and they hold this historical gathering. So I'm a historian, now hired as a historian at York University, as mentioned in my introduction. So I went there to do a talk, but I do a lot of stuff in Ojibwe. I try to use my work and my study to facilitate my acquisition of Anishinaabemowin. Anyway, they had talked at that, this was last year, they had talked about at the Mississaugas of the Credit, they no longer have any community members that are from there that speak Ojibwe. If somebody speaks Ojibwe at the Mississaugas of the Credit, they married into the community from a different community. So they had talked about that they had brought a fellow, their own community member had gone out and he learned how to make a birch bark canoe. They came back and he taught the students there, and they made their own birch bark canoe, and it was in the community center while we were doing this talk. And I says, well, imagine if we had this digital repository here. This is a film made by the National Film Board of Canada called Caesar's Canoe. And he is a Algonquin speaker. And this is a still taken from the movie, and that's Caesar there bent down, but these are his two grandchildren, and they're watching him make this canoe. But the film board at that time, I forget when the date was of this made, but you see it says, Wikwasateo Minoshin Emananekatek Etakokik. And here, so this is a dialect of Anishinaabemowin that I'm not familiar with, that I can't actually I don't, if I read it on its own, I wouldn't understand it. But here, this is another one from Minnesota, from Madeline Island, Earl Nyholm, who collaborated with the linguist John Nichols, and they made the Minnesota Concise Dictionary of Minnesota Ojibwe, and they also collaborated that formed the basis for the Ojibwe People's Dictionary, which is also another online dictionary. But there was an Ojibwe text anthology that was made by and edited by John D. Nichols. And Earl Nyholm made a canoe, and then he narrated it all in Ojibwe. So I was telling them at that gathering, I says, well, imagine if you had access to both of these, because on Manitoulin here as well, we have a good number of speakers still, but I believe we don't have the terminology that goes the specific or specialized terminology that goes with building a birch bark canoe. And this is how we can then recover that, is by looking at and viewing what Caesar talked about, and also what Earl Nahum, the words that he used in the construction of that. And then we can actually piece together, based on our dialect, of making a new, converting those words into our dialect, because it actually would be the same, probably the same words, and we would just or incorporate them into our programming. That's what I think is the promise of these. This is the last slide. This is the late elder Dan Pine, who is a descendant from a Ojibwe chief named Jigwa Kons, and also Jigwa Kons' son was named Jingwak, and that's the one who the residential school was named after, because he had a vision of teaching wigwams. It didn't turn out the way he wanted. He didn't want it to be residential schools. What became the residential schools? Anyway, this was also, I want to end on this, is Getche Pizzajik Kinumagewak. This is Dan Pine, and this is from the collections, the digital collections of the Ojibwe Culture Foundation. Mind you, I should say right now that I would not, at this point, I would not be able to find this quickly in the Ojibwe Culture Foundation archives. We are working on it. We're making the finding aid, and we're making a way to actually, and then again, cite back. All I know is that this is part of the Ojibwe Culture Foundation recording repositories. Nengachko neap, gadene biskabime, anwe go wabam, oswabam, ngobobong, nendaksanowe. Nishke nongo eshkip madzijik, jikenda moat, jawam da moat, gewin wa wedek chitwa wazwin, ga bigijwebinamang, ga anwendamang, abdekko kajigiwemin guding. We are slowly going back, even though it may be tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, or next year. It does not seem that way. Look after the new generation, so they will know, so they too can see the richness of what we let go, what we threw away. We are going to have to go home someday. So again, this harkens back to that teaching that of the prophecy, the seven fire prophecy, where a new people would emerge, and they would look for what was left alongside the trail. That was the amount that I was trying to get that down a bit more, but that's as far as I got. Anyway, to pare it down more. Anyway, thank you for logging in, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Brian, for inviting me, and Adriana and Ruth, I'm sorry that I wanted to get to visit with Maureen and Carol again in person. That'll have to wait, I guess. And I'm glad to have virtually met the rest of the presenters from today, Sarah, Alex, and Laura. So I've taken up your evening, and thank you for that time. Here I see in the chat Alice Taff, bilingual time-aligned video software, I don't know how to say it, is being developed from the University of Alberta for, and that for Tlingit, that might be the same fellow, Auntie Arp and others, that whole group there.
Thank you.
There's been a bit of activity in the chat and the Q&A, so I think I answered it. So
yeah, thank you, Alan, for a massive amount of territory that you covered, and not just great information on so many projects, but also reflections and ways to think about it. We have a few minutes here. We can chat a little bit just on questions, and if anyone has a question that's come to mind, feel free to drop that in. And I can say that for people who are curious or come joining us by Zoom, a lot of the projects that Alan mentioned are the context of what we did earlier today. This event is part of our digital knowledge sharing workshop. And Digital Knowledge Sharing Fellowships is one of the programs we have here. It funds different kind of community-led, community-driven projects that are using archival materials for various kinds of, especially digital projects of many different kinds. So a lot of the things that Alan was referring to are different ones we'd heard about earlier today. And I like how you connected across many of them. I also wanted to plug a couple of the books you mentioned. One is this one. I think this is the one that has the William Trudeau story, that long story you were mentioning. I'm sorry that it's flipped around, but this is a great book, Stories of Our Elders. It's a number of stories in Anishinaabemowin in English. And then this is the Kamigaad from those recordings from the late 40s and Harbor Springs, northern Michigan. Those are two of the books that Alan mentioned. And if you didn't get those titles, feel free to email me or we can give you that information. One question I thought I'd pose to you, Alan, is like, you showed, and The Art of Tradition is the other really important book that's from the those recordings from the late 40s that connects as well. So get all of those books and you'll have a lot of great stuff to think about and work with. One thing I was thinking about, since you've shown a lot of way that various initiatives and projects kind of, a lot of things there's, as you said, there can be funding support to put together things, a project to get stuff started, but sort of the upkeep over the long term is a sort of a different thing. And I think I was trying to think, well, certainly here, any kind of, certainly if I can just speak for here at the APS, we see things, we did this 20 years ago and this has changed and didn't actually, things panned out in different ways because of technology or people or who knows what. I was trying to think of one of the positive things of seeing how kind of things work out differently over the years. And I think is that we now have can have a lot of experience of seeing the fact that that happens. And one of the things that needs to get maintained along in terms of maintaining the resources is maintaining the people to do the different parts of it. And I was wondering if, like, over your 20-some years of doing this, given these sort of projects that have sort of changed form or become less accessible or something got out of whack, or is the fact of sort of having experiences of seeing that over the time led to sort of more people getting it now, the fact that these new projects need ongoing support, like people doing technical stuff, archival work, do you see kind of that being a sort of easier case to make for doing these things nowadays?
No, sadly, I don't see that. The funny thing is, I think that one thing was, it's not just me, I'm not trying to say toot my own horn here or anything, but I think what the phenomenon is people end up saying, oh, Alan will do that, instead of this is our collective responsibility. Eh? So and that we should fund this, or so it ends up being, and then it's kind of almost like the same thing is said with for language in our community anyway, and then I've heard this in other communities, that people will say that's the school's responsibility. The school should do better, and there's this idea of somebody else will do that, or it should be done, but somebody else will do that. Then the other thing that I see happening as well is this talk was actually gonna be a bit about looking at some kind of more ephemeral stuff on like Twitter. I'm not on Twitter, but like on Facebook, and how many people are contributing to stuff like Ojibwe Fix of the Day, Ojibwe Language Word of the Day, and then also posting different things. But all of that isn't being cataloged either. Like there's some valuable material, but I don't know what's going to happen once like Meta becomes like MySpace. One of the things that I was listening to the CBC radio. It's the equivalent of NPR, I think it's called in the States, and whoever it was, the internet was going to get rid of all of the MySpace pages, and then they put out a call, and people, and it was going to be erased from like even the Wayback Machine. So what people were doing was they parsed it out, and all these volunteers got together to actually save that and archive that. And it was just really an interesting thing, because people think, what I think is happening as well, this is another thing, is people think, well, it's on the internet, it'll last forever. And then of course you always hear that, of course, of more notorious or salacious material, that once it's on the internet, it's going to stay there forever. But once you can go to the Wayback Machine, but how many people are actually going to go around and dig for that is the other part. That's the other thing. And earlier, Maureen, I think, was the one who talked about this idea of we're trying to get people to discover this stuff, to know what's there. So there's this whole idea of what now we would put it bluntly as marketing and promotion, because a lot of people don't know that it's that there's so much stuff that's already out there. And what I have seen is there's so many different courses, introductory Ojibwe, that if you actually go out there and you start looking, you'll see so many people have done similar lessons over and over again, but there's no way to actually go to the next level. So people don't see where is the next level to find something more complex, or there's more, somebody already did something like this, but they actually haven't really there. It just seems that I'll be able to find it on Google, or I'll be able to find it on Facebook. And so that's why I started with that Toffler that idea. It wasn't a direct quote, but this idea of the preoccupation before was preserving or storing information, especially in books and in archives and repositories, but that he said in the future the emphasis will be on finding it. And that's what I think what this repository, these digital repositories are, and why we have to try and start to make finding aids and actually connect them, have them an interoperability way of doing that, is so that somebody who's done something in Quebec, let's say, it's just to use the canoe example, then to find that at with Earl's Canoe, match that up. But the other thing is, with Earl's Canoe, if you look online, I wasn't able to find the Ojibwe version. I just found the English version, and it was by Documentaries for Educational Resources or something like that, DER. Anyway, I just found the English version. But I knew that there was an Ojibwe version because of the Ojibwe text anthology. And I like what Sarah said I think it was Sarah, said, I believe in books. And they're the most durable things still that will last and you'll be able to find it, and that it'll still exist. So and I'm a big believer in that as well, that we still need to make books, physical copies, because at the end we don't know we don't know if how long these SD cards are going to last. Like, they'll deteriorate. And we've been able to save these wax recordings and these wire recordings, but I don't know if you've ever tried to transcribe an old Ojibwe or any language on a wire recording, even after it's been cleaned up. It's very difficult. And there's valuable information on there, but it's not very accessible. So I'm just concerned about that an SD card that we put on a shelf, then we make a copy of it, we put it stored in a different location. Of course, as an archivist, you know that you got to store the original in one fireproof, safe place, flood-proof and all this. But then you make a copy and you store it off-site at a different place. But I don't know how many Indigenous communities know that or are doing that they store the original in a fireproof, flood-proof, disaster-proof space, and then they make a copy and they store that at a different place in case there is a fire, in case there is a flood, in case there is a tornado, that there's still a copy of that original one. and then the derivative ones that are starting to populate. You make you take a copy, you just select especially in iMovie or QuickTime, you end up, next thing you know, you got a bunch of copies of this of that original file. You don't know where the original file is anymore. At least that's what has happened with me, and it sounds like that is what had happened with Laura and the people that she works up in Alaska.
Yeah, and a lot of that's kind of parallels what you were saying about the lady who kind of knew, called her up on the phone. She knew what
Yeah.
happened in Jordan, and that's like the digital equivalent of that. And it's also I would also add kind of the very mundane things like, what's the file name? It sounds so, these
Right.
mundane, kind of boring, kind of unnoticeable things can really be the touch points that kind of come back. But I also want what you said, one of the things you said kind of beat me to another question I already had, which was like, how do you, when people say, oh, we ought to do X thing, but you know that that's been done 10 years ago, how do you sort of spread the word that those resources exist so people can not reinvent the wheel, but kind of add to what it's already done?
That's an interesting thing, because I was like, I'm surprised in a sense, but I'm thinking I shouldn't be surprised, because everything does go through these cycles, and they're almost like fads. When I worked at Lakeview School, there's a older teacher in the on staff there, and they said, we're getting training on whatever this was. And so she looked at the précis and read a bit about it, and she goes, oh, I know about that. She goes, they called this whatever 10 years ago, and then 20 years ago it was called this. So she said they just repackage and label these things and make them into that they're the new theory or the new pedagogy or the new whatever. And that's what's actually seems to be happening, is people are starting to use different words and repackage things that actually I'm like, or they're looking for that, and I'm like, this was already done 10 years ago. If you just used that and actually fully implemented it, then evaluated it, then you would actually get a more fine-tuned, whatever it is, curriculum or lesson plan, instead of saying, I'm going to make my whole new one all up on my own. There seems to be a propensity or proclivity of people that want to make it their own, and I understand that. I get that, but there doesn't seem to be people willing to use a whole cadre of materials that are already made. And I've been part of a different educational things, educational initiatives and projects where we have made curricular materials, and we wanted them to get tested out by teachers. Teachers tested them out, and they were supposed to give feedback, and then we were supposed to implement that and make a newer one. But the idea was great, and then it got so far, and then many of the teachers used the test unit, but then they didn't actually give feedback. And then after, this was a 5-year project again, then after the 5 years, that died. And then all that great information that was assembled and put together is now stored in some storage place. So,
well, I think these stories can be helpful for people to hear, because I think these stories are quite common in all sorts of places.
yeah.
So I think, when doing and having these experiences over the years, or immediate ones that are at hand, if you think of it, everyone kind of thinks that, well, to speak as an archivist, all archivists think that their metadata is messier than everybody else's, or I think in sharing stories, we can kind of realize that they're very common and normal kinds of things that happen with these kinds of technologies initiatives. It can also be encouraging, and I think maybe that's kind of a good note that we could think about for people thinking about this, is to because we can also then share stories about things that went well or good ideas, and you shared like a ton of good ideas about ways to think about and approach different things, and I think that our audience will be able to take that and apply that to a lot of the projects that they're doing. So we really appreciate your time, and I'm gonna return to this video and note down some of the things that you noted in passing and that I really liked and wanted to look at further as well, and I think other people will as well. But you've been real generous with your time, and we'll wrap it up for now. And I want to say thank you very much, Ellen, and we hope we can have you here in person in the future to chat and talk about more stuff. And we hope that all of you who have joined us as well will be in touch with any questions or follow-up thoughts you have as well. We'll share when the recording's available as well. But in the meantime, thank you, Alan. If you want to say any parting words, I don't know.
Well, thank you all for, I went way over time, but I'm glad some of you stuck around till the bitter end and to listen to how some of the experiences I've had, but also that I know it's like I said earlier, I think this is a really common story and common challenges. So thank you again, Brian, for the invite, and thank you all the APS staff for the technical services and doing a good job on that end. And thank all the other, I wish I was there in person, for the other people that I would have met today.
Thank you for those words, Alan, and to everyone, we hope that you and your family and friends are well, and we look forward to seeing you all again very soon. In time, take care. Okay, bye-bye.